They said I wasted my potential, that I threw everything away, that I was the disappointment they didn't know how to explain to others. Not out loud, of course. My family was too polished for that. But I heard it anyway, in their silences, in the way their eyes softened with pity at every gathering, in the long pauses after someone asked, "So, what is Jessica up to these days?" I stopped correcting them eventually. Let them talk. Let them think I was lost. Because sometimes the truth doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits. My name is Jessica Parker. I'm 34 years old. I live in a modest apartment on the edge of Portland. I make my own coffee, fix my own faucet leaks, and yes, I still drive that old Toyota Corolla that rattles when it turns left. To them, I'm the one who stayed behind. The one who didn't get married, didn't climb a corporate ladder, didn't buy a house with a big backyard. I became the family anecdote. A warning, a whisper of what not to become. It wasn't always like this. I was once the overachiever. National Honor Society, top of my class, scholarship to Stanford. The future lawyer of the family. That title stayed until I walked out halfway through my second year of law school, just after my engagement fell apart and my anxiety stopped responding to sleep or medication. They didn't understand. They didn't ask. Just adjusted their tone when they said my name. My sister Emily, on the other hand, followed the plan. She studied marketing, married young, worked her way up in a firm where she could wear heels and carry coffee with confidence. Emily was easy to brag about. I wasn't. 3 weeks before her wedding, I got a group text. "Can you help with the programs or something small? I know you're not really working right now." I blinked at the message. I own my own company. It's not flashy. It's not something you'd understand in a single sentence. But it's real. Real enough to pay my rent, to employ 3 part-timers, and to be featured in a national podcast on social innovation. They didn't know. Because they never asked. Still, I said yes to helping with the programs. Because that's what the quiet ones do. We smile. We say it's fine. We carry the chairs. But sometimes, quietly, we build things bigger than the ones who ignored us. The night before the wedding, I was at the rehearsal dinner folding napkins into swans like it mattered. My mother introduced me to Emily's soon-to-be in-laws as Jessica, the creative one. She does freelance, I think? Freelance. That catch-all word they use when they don't want to admit they don't know. I just smiled and said, "Something like that." Emily didn't look up. She was too busy laughing with her bridal party. But her fiancé, Nathan, he watched. Just for a moment. A flicker of curiosity, or maybe something else. Then it was gone. I didn't think much of it. The wedding day came fast. White roses, a cathedral veil, rows of smiling people who all knew their role. Mine was simple. Table 5, next to Aunt Denise, who once told me she prayed I'd find direction. I didn't correct her either. Because if you tell people you're happy when you don't look like their version of success, they assume you're lying. Dinner was served. Toasts were made. I stayed quiet, ate politely, smiled at the right moments. Until Nathan, the groom, came over. He leaned in, glass of champagne in hand, and said softly, "Wait. Are you the Jessica Parker I think you are?" My fork froze. He stared. The founder of Teachwell? The digital platform for underserved schools? His voice wasn't mocking. It was awestruck. My family stopped talking. Their forks hovered midair. The silence that followed didn't feel like judgment this time. It felt like a crack in the narrative. I looked at Nathan and simply said, "Yes." The silence at table 5 lasted exactly 6 seconds. That might not sound like much, but in wedding time, 6 seconds is a lifetime. Enough for forks to lower, brows to lift, and mouths to close mid-sentence. My mother looked like someone had just spilled red wine on the dress code. Nathan's eyes didn't leave mine. "Teachwell," he said again, almost to himself. "I read about it in Fast Company. It's the platform helping rural schools get real-time access to curriculum updates, right? I nodded, feeling 100 eyes I'd tried so hard to avoid, finally seeing me. Yes, that's mine. Aunt Denise blinked. You built a company? I wanted to say, no, I grew it. Quietly, while you were talking about Emily's Pinterest board and worrying about me finding a husband. But instead, I just smiled and said, for the past 5 years, yeah? Nathan looked stunned. That's incredible. You were on that education tech panel last year, weren't you? I watched it. Your story about the school in Utah with no Wi-Fi nearly made me cry. The table didn't know what to do with itself. My mother recovered first. She gave a brittle laugh and said, well, we always knew Jessica was creative. That word again. Creative. The family code for not normal, not stable, not one of us. But that night, it didn't sting the same. Nathan pulled out a chair, sat next to me, and launched into questions. How did I build the back end? How did I secure the grants? Who designed the accessibility dashboard? For the first time in years, I talked about my work at a family event. Not in whispers, not as a joke, but like it mattered, because it did. And as I talked, I saw my sister watching from across the room. She wasn't smiling. Emily had always been the star. She got the praise, the parties, the spotlight. I got the expectations, until I walked away from law school and took the spotlight down with me. They hated that. Not because I failed, but because I failed loudly, publicly, and then disappeared. They didn't know what I had built in the quiet. Teachwell started as a Google Doc. I was tutoring underfunded high schools part-time and realized every teacher I worked with said the same thing. We're too disconnected. We don't have what the bigger schools have. So I built it. A tool that allowed districts to upload, share, and revise lesson plans with each other, saving time and closing resource gaps. I learned to code again, took night courses, sold my furniture for my first server space. I lived off instant noodles and grant rejections. But I kept going, because every time a teacher in a rural district said, "This changed how I teach," it lit something in me that no family approval ever could. 3 years in, a nonprofit took notice. Then a grant came through. Then another. Then a podcast feature. Now, Teachwell has over 40,000 users, mostly in schools no one at that wedding had ever heard of. But schools that mattered. They never asked about any of it. And maybe that was the part that hurt most. Not that they misunderstood me, but that they never tried to understand at all. After dinner, while Emily was dancing with her new husband, my mother approached. She had that tight smile again, the one she wore like armor. "You never told us about this Teach Place thing," she said. "Teachwell," I corrected gently. She tilted her head. "Why didn't you mention it before?" I shrugged. Didn't seem like anyone was listening. She blinked at that, maybe stung, maybe not. It was hard to tell with her. "You could have said something," she added. "I did," I said, "just not in words you wanted to hear." She didn't respond to that, just looked away, like she was already rewriting the moment in her mind, editing it into something that didn't make her uncomfortable. Later that night, I slipped away from the reception and walked alone through the garden path behind the venue. It was quiet. The kind of quiet you earn after too many rooms full of noise. I stood under the fairy lights, remembering the last time I sat in this much silence. It was the day I walked out of law school. The day no one called. The day I became the family failure. I smiled softly to myself. Let them keep their silence. Because I was done shrinking to fit their version of success. This was just the beginning. The Monday after the wedding, my inbox looked different. There was the usual stack of school district requests and one too many urgent login not working subject lines. But then, halfway down, something new caught my eye. Subject: Inquiry, Keynote Panel on Rural Education Solutions, from Executive Director, West Coast Learning Summit. I opened it slowly, almost afraid it might disappear. "Hi, Jessica." It began. We saw your work through the Forbes education feature and recently heard from a contact who spoke highly of you at a wedding. Nathan. It had to be. They wanted me to speak on a panel next month in San Francisco. 3 other founders, a senator, and the head of a major charter school network. It was real, professional. The kind of opportunity you forward to your parents with a proud, "thought you'd want to see this." But I didn't forward it. I stared at it for a long time, then closed the laptop. Because even now, part of me wondered if it would matter to them. That afternoon, I went to the corner cafe where I always worked when the walls of my apartment felt too tight. As I stirred my coffee, I noticed 2 new friend requests on LinkedIn, both from guests at the wedding. One had written, "I had no idea that was your work. What you've built is incredible. I'd love to connect." The word connect felt strange. For years, I had been invisible. Background noise at family events, reduced to polite nods and small talk. Now suddenly there was attention, interest, even admiration, but not from the people I used to want it from. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. "Emily, you free for lunch this week?" Just us. I read it twice. My sister and I hadn't had a real conversation in over a year. We'd exchanged pleasantries at holidays, posed for family photos, but we hadn't actually talked since before she got engaged. I replied, "Wednesday at noon. The Garden Cafe on 5th? Emily. Perfect. Looking forward to it." The heart at the end made me pause. Emily didn't do hearts. At least not for me. When Wednesday came, she was already at the table when I arrived. Sunglasses perched on her head, iced latte half drunk, perfectly composed. She smiled when she saw me, but it felt off, like she was rehearsing a part. "Hey," she said, standing to hug me. "You look great." "Thanks," I said, sitting. "So do you." We ordered, made small talk about the weather and wedding gifts until finally she leaned in. "I didn't know about your company," she said. I really didn't know." I nodded. "I figured." She hesitated. "Why didn't you tell us? You could have said something sooner." I looked at her carefully. "Would it have mattered?" Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Of course it would have." I raised an eyebrow. "Last Christmas, you asked if I was still doing that online thing. The year before that, Mom said, 'Maybe next year you'll have something real to share.' And every time I said something about my work, the subject changed." She looked down, stirring her drink. "I guess I didn't realize." "That's the point," I said quietly. "No one did. Because no one cared to ask." There was a pause. For once, she didn't have a defense ready. Then she sighed. "You know, I think I always resented you a little." That I didn't expect. "What do you mean?" "You left," she said. "You walked away from the plan, from law school, from everything they wanted. And even when they judged you, you still did your own thing. I never had that courage." I sat with that. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. "I didn't feel brave," I told her. "I felt like I was falling apart, but I had to choose something that wouldn't break me." She nodded slowly. "You chose something meaningful. I see that now, and I'm sorry for the way we treated you. For how I treated you." I didn't know what to say. I dreamed of this moment, but it felt different in real life. Softer, less triumphant, more human. "I appreciate that," I said. "Really." We sat in silence for a while, but it wasn't the cold kind. It was the kind that mended something invisible. Before we left, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You're not a failure, Jess. You never were. We just weren't paying attention." That stayed with me. But the truth? I didn't need their validation anymore. Because I was building something that mattered, with or without applause. And soon the world would know it too. The week after lunch with Emily felt strangely still. There were no dramatic family group chats, No calls from my mother asking probing questions. No sudden praise or overcompensating compliments. But something had changed. Not loud, not visible. But I felt it. Like a shift in the air pressure. Like the pause between thunder and rain. I started getting tagged in posts I didn't expect. One from a wedding guest. Truly honored to meet the founder of Teachwell last weekend. The world needs more people like her. Another from a teacher in Oklahoma I'd never met. Because of it Teachwell, I was able to adapt my curriculum for students with learning disabilities. Thank you, Jessica Parker. Then came the message from a local reporter. We're doing a piece on changemakers from the Pacific Northwest. You've been nominated several times. Would you be open to a short interview? I stared at the screen, blinking. For years, I had fought to get people to care. Applied for funding, cold emailed superintendents, built late into the night just for someone to notice. Now, the noticing was coming to me. Still, I didn't tell my family. Not yet. Let them hear it on their own time. When it wasn't me trying to prove something, but simply the truth arriving uninvited. That Friday, I had coffee with my old mentor, Nadia, the first person who ever looked at Teachwell and said, "This could be national." She took one look at me and smiled. "Something's different," she said. "You're standing taller." I laughed. Maybe, or maybe I'm just done ducking. She sipped her espresso and leaned forward. "Are you ready for what's coming?" "What do you mean?" "I mean attention, Jess. Awards, speaking invitations, the pressure of recognition. You've been working in the shadows for so long that I wonder, are you ready to be seen?" I thought about that, and I realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was tired of pretending not to matter. "Yeah," I said. "I'm ready." The interview came out 3 days later. A clean, honest piece about the evolution of Teachwell, featuring a photo of me standing in front of a classroom, smiling with one of our earliest student pilot groups. The caption read, "Jessica Parker, the quiet visionary changing the future of public education." I didn't send it to my mother, but someone did. Because the next morning, she called. "Hi," she said after a long silence. "Hi," I replied. "I read the article," she said. "It was impressive." "Thanks." Another pause. "You looked happy." "I was." She took a breath. "I didn't realize the scale of what you were doing." "I know. I feel like I missed so much." "You did." Silence again. "I'm sorry, Jessica," she said quietly. "I know that's late, but I am. It wasn't perfect, but it was something." "I appreciate that," I said. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing big. Weather, groceries, a new bakery that opened near her. But under it all was something new. Respect. Fragile, tentative, but real. Later that week, the interview was shared again, this time by a national education platform. My inbox flooded with speaking invitations, school partnership inquiries, and even a few cautious messages from distant relatives who suddenly remembered they were related to me. And then, at the end of the week, I got the invitation. Emily and Nathan's post-wedding celebration brunch. An informal get-together for close friends and family to celebrate their new journey together. I wasn't going to go, but part of me was curious. How they'd look at me now. What they'd say. And part of me wanted to see if anything had truly changed. So I said yes. The brunch was in a sunlit garden behind a country club. White tablecloths, mimosas, tiny name cards. I wore a soft navy dress and my confidence like armor. As I stepped inside, heads turned. Some smiled politely. Others looked uncertain, like they'd just realized they might have been wrong about me for years. Nathan spotted me first and grinned. "Jessica, glad you made it." Emily came over and hugged me, this time tight, sincere. We sat at the same table as our cousins. I expected the usual awkward chatter, but instead, I heard it. Jessica's company was on the news this morning. She works with school systems nationwide, right? I read that article. She built it from scratch, like alone. They weren't whispers anymore. They were echoes of respect. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a misfit at the table. I felt like I belonged. It happened at the wedding reception. Not the ceremony, not the speeches, not even during the cake cutting. But during dinner, just after the salads were cleared, just before the main course arrived. I had found my seat quietly, back corner table, next to a cousin who once told me, tech stuff was a man's game. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for them. I was there for Emily. Despite everything, I wanted to honor her day. And besides, I'd made peace with being invisible in rooms like this. Or at least, I thought I had. The clinking of silverware and the soft hum of chatter filled the hall. I was halfway through a polite conversation with the florist about hydrangeas when Nathan, Emily's new husband, stood from across the room and walked over to our table. He smiled, leaned down beside me, and asked softly, "Wait, are you the Jessica Parker I think you are?" The room didn't stop immediately, but the air around us did. I glanced up. "What do you mean?" He smiled wider. "I just saw an interview on LinkedIn this morning about Teachwell, the digital education platform that's transforming rural learning environments. The founder's name was Jessica Parker. Looked just like you." I froze. Before I could respond, someone at the table muttered, "That's our Jessica. She's been doing some online thing?" Nathan looked surprised. "The Jessica Parker? The one who created adaptive curriculum software for underfunded schools?" I gave a slight nod. "That's me." It was like someone pressed pause on the whole evening. Conversations around us stilled. Heads turned. Forks hovered midair. Even the servers slowed their steps. Emily, from across the room, looked over, eyes narrowing, trying to read the moment. Nathan turned to the table and said, "Guys, do you understand? She's the reason my cousin's school in Wyoming finally got a working digital learning plan. Their dropout rate went down by 30% in 1 year. I read that case study. Uncle Raymond, who once joked I should marry rich, cleared his throat and sat straighter. Aunt Denise's wine glass wobbled as she set it down. Nathan looked at me, eyes wide. "You built this from scratch?" "I had help eventually," I said, voice calm. "But yeah, I started it alone, in my apartment, 5 years ago." He shook his head, impressed. "You're amazing." I felt the heat of eyes on my skin. It used to make me shrink. Now it made me stand a little taller. Emily approached slowly, face unreadable. "Jess," she said softly, "you never told me the full extent of it." "I tried," I said, "but no one ever listened long enough to hear it." She winced. "I'm sorry." Before I could reply, Nathan raised his glass. "To Jessica Parker, the woman whose work is quietly changing lives across the country. May we never underestimate what grace and grit can build behind closed doors." The room clapped, not politely, not awkwardly, genuinely. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the backup story. I felt like the headline. After the applause faded and the dinner resumed, my mother walked over. She didn't say much at first, just looked at me, eyes soft in a way I hadn't seen since I was a little girl. Then she said, "I watched your panel last night. The one from San Francisco." I cried, I blinked. "You watched it?" She nodded. 3 times. I swallowed hard. "I was so focused on what you didn't become," she said, "that I never saw what you were becoming." She reached out, gently touched my hand. "I'm proud of you, Jessica." My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I just nodded. Later that night, as the music swelled and people flooded the dance floor, I stepped out onto the terrace. The air was cool, the sky brushed with stars. Nathan joined me a few minutes later, 2 glasses in hand. He passed me one. "So, what's next for Teachwell?" I smiled. Expansion, more rural districts, more languages, and maybe international reach. There's a team in South Africa asking for a pilot. He raised his glass. To the future. To quiet beginnings, I added. We clinked glasses. As the night wore on, I thought about the years I spent hiding, dimming my own light to avoid making others uncomfortable. I thought about how they talked behind my back, called me a failure, rewrote my story before it was finished. But the truth? They didn't write my story. I did. And now, the world was finally reading it.